debate before doing this talk at home during the week as to whether or not to follow the wonderful example of sitting on stools last week that was set by Stephen Rowe. And I won't say which one of us won, but somebody in our relationship got his own way. So
I'd just like to apologise. If it's not as funny as you expect when I speak, it's because we're going to try to do this together after 34 years of marriage today to this wonderful woman.
So, yeah, we're talking about raising children. The first thing I want to say is half of you will probably already have switched off thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me. You're either thinking, well, I'm way too young to be thinking about that. Forget it, I'll zone out, play on my phone. Or you'll be thinking, well, my kids have left home. You know, that ship has sailed. Or you'll be thinking, no, I'm probably not likely to have children for whatever reason. This applies to all of us because, as Andy has just said, we are family doing kingdom together. And you've probably heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. And some of our friends here from the African nations are outstanding at that. And we can learn from them. It takes a village to raise a child. This is our village, okay? So we are all in this together. So if ever you see any of my grandkids misbehaving, please feel free to tell them off. You have my permission. So, the other thing to say at the beginning is we've been asked to do this talk not because we are perfect as parents, not because we are in any way perfect, not because we haven't made mistakes. By the grace of God, both of our children who are now grown, they're 27 and 30, by the grace of God, they are both firing on all cylinders for the Lord. But that's the grace of God, okay? It doesn't mean we are perfect and we've got it sorted and we've got it right. We haven't. We've made many, many mistakes, as you will hear during this. So I want to open by reading Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up.
So we moved here 25 years ago. Our children were 5 and 2. And I think the village made we'll call you the village people, after the singing we did at Greenbank on Friday. The village was so important. Our children always loved it if Dave Southern was around, so do tell him, because he's not here today, how much of an impact he had on our children. They loved it if he came round, if we did barbecues at our house, we had volleyball. Everything started at our house. But he was a single man at the time, hadn't met Shah Miller at the time, and he was just fantastic with them. But so was Aisha. She always would take an interest in these two little children and still does when they see her again years later. People who made a huge impact on our children were the youth leaders, Rowan, Steph, Russell and Lydia, so important. Loads of people made a big difference. Mark and Mary and her teaching non-stop, really. She still teaches in the kids' work. She's been doing that for 25 years. She headed it up for years and years, but it was also important. It was important that the children loved coming to church, had a role in church. I was just looking at Johnny playing guitar today and thinking, he had a role at 15. He was our drummer when we used to meet at St. Hilda's High School just down the road. It's important that you help your children have a role. And if you think, actually, I think he could do the PowerPoint, or she could be in the band, or talk to someone, make it happen. Because it's not that we're against having the children be very, very involved in all kinds of different ways. So it really does take a village to raise our children. But it also, I think, it's important for us to learn from our own backgrounds. We've all been shaped by our mum and our dad and where we grew up and who we went to school with. So for me, my mum was a teacher. She wanted education. My dad wanted sport, so he loved sport. So those two big values are values that eventually I took on board when I became a Christian. But the main thing we wanted to change from my upbringing was I didn't grow up hearing about Jesus. I never heard about Jesus from my mum or dad. And we thought we want our children to hear about Jesus all the time, but in a fun way that is kind of draws them in and they want to be a part of it. So yeah, very important to get your children involved in some way.
Yeah, my upbringing was very different from Graham, so there were certain things in the way I was brought up that I wanted to impart to the children. And equally, there were certain things in the way I was brought up that I wanted to make sure that our children didn't get. So it's really important to examine yourselves when you're raising children or when you're helping to look after other people's children, to think, what are my focuses? What are my priorities here? What am I expecting of them? What should I not be expecting of them? How we raise our children determines how our kids are going to relate to God. That's really important. It's no good raising our children one way and saying stuff and saying, you need to get to church, you need to go out to Sunday school, you need to learn this, if we're living differently from that. The main place that a child learns anything, including faith, is at home with the parent or the carer or whoever it is that are the caregivers for that child. It's essential that we don't just tell kids what to do, but we demonstrate it. We live it out day by day, what we do, what we say, how we say it, how they hear us talk about other people. That was really important to us. So our kids, when they were sort of yay big, they would come home from church and say, what did that mean? Why did that person say that? Why did they do that? Why don't they come any more? Why are they doing this? And we needed to explain to them what was going on in a way that was honoring their question, but that was respectful, but that gave them information sufficient for their age, that was age appropriate. One of the things that we did was we took a huge decision that a lot of people did not agree with, but we both agreed totally about something we were going to tell our children from a very young age. Now, when we say this, we're not saying, hey, it's biblical, you have to do this. We're just telling you what we felt was appropriate for our children. Fast backwards, many, many years. Rewind, that's the word I was looking for. Rewind. Fast. Very fast. An awful long way to when I was 17 years old. I came home from school one day and my mum looked very displaced and she sat me down. She said, I've got some news for you. And she said, your father is leaving to be with another woman. And I remember the first and only time in my entire life that I felt the blood literally drain from my face. I was in shock, truly in shock, because my parents seemed to be this very solid, together, sort of respected in the community type couple. And it was the last thing I was expecting my mum to say to me. She also took that opportunity to tell me something else that shocked me equally, which is that my father had apparently been married before he met my mother. There were no children from that marriage, but he had been married earlier. Again, this was a huge shock to me and really impacted me for many, many years. As a result of that, we decided that we didn't want our children to hear anything from our past, anything at all, that was going to cause them that amount of distress. So we decided that we were going to take the opportunity to tell them when they were just old enough to understand that Graham had been married before meeting me, and he'll talk more about that. But we felt that by doing this, I think they were aged about 3, weren't they? I mean, they were really very, very young. And you think, well, that's way too young to tell a child. We felt it was absolutely ideal, and we are so glad that we've done it, because then it wasn't an issue. Because you know how children just accept things that they're told and run with it? That's what they've done. They ran with it, and it was never an issue that we had to sit down. And so they asked questions a bit more and more as they got older, you know, oh, what about this, what about that? But we felt it was appropriate, and in doing so, we felt we were breeding maturity into our children. We were honouring them by giving them some really key information, and we were respecting them as well. We weren't saying, oh, you know, you're too little to understand this, we might tell you when you're older. And I think they really took that on board, and they always felt honoured and respected because of that.
Yeah, I think for me, the best preachers share positive stories of how they've done well with Jesus, and they also share their heartbreaks and how they've struggled and had to call on the Lord in difficult times. And so me going through a divorce was horrendous for me. I didn't want to go through it. I tried to keep my marriage together as my ex-wife went off with yet another guy. And left. She was the girl who took me to church. She was the girl who helped me hear about Jesus. And now she's going off not really caring. And she said, I never loved you. I'm going to divorce you. I'm going to remarry. Then I will repent. And I'm like, you can't do that. She did it. I'm not sure she's actually come back to God. She goes to church again now, 20 years later. But it's important that you tell your children the struggles. Otherwise, it just seems like everything's easy. There are times in every Christian life, if you live long enough, you will have big heartbreak and have to call on God. And there is something in us that wishes we could mark out the road for ourselves, but it doesn't say that. It says the race marked out for us. It's completely different. God marks out a road. God tells us to run the race with perseverance. And I think you've got to tell your children the good and the bad, and help them to understand. You call on the Lord in both. You thank God in both. You rejoice in both. You even see trials as something, you're still in the hands of God, even though you're going through something terrible.
So, as I've already said, the main place that children are going to learn is at home. That's where you want the important things to happen. Yes, you want to choose the right school. Yes, you want to make sure that you're in a church that's teaching the right things, and that's good and that's very important. But there's no point expecting other people to really be the main teachers of their faith unless you're doing that at home. So even the little things, tiny little things. Again, one of the things that we did that not everybody agreed with, and as I say, this is not necessarily, well, it isn't in the Bible because they didn't have television in those days, but you see what I'm saying? We took a decision based on what we thought was best for our kids, and again, we're glad we've done it. We want our children to be in the world, but not of the world. And if you've not heard that phrase before, what it basically means is that you are living out there every day with people. You're not sort of isolated and mollycoddled and in a little cotton wool bubble away from everything. You need to teach kids how to face the difficulties of this world. And that is getting harder and harder and harder these days. So we decided that when a lot of Christians, we're going back sort of 25 years ago now, when a lot of Christians were saying, oh, we don't want our children to watch things like Harry Potter and Snow White and films all about evil and fairies and magic and things like that. What we did was we took those as opportunities for spiritual teaching. Rather than just saying, yeah, go off and watch that, we sat down with our kids and watched Harry Potter or Snow White or whatever it was. And then we would pause it every now and then and said, do you see what this is a picture of? This is a picture of heaven. This is a picture of dark and light. And this is what it's like with Jesus. This is the warfare that we're in this world. We took those things as opportunities to introduce spiritual warfare to our children. And that meant that when they went to school, they weren't afraid, like some other kids were terrified of these scary stories. One other parent I knew said, oh no, I don't let my kids watch anything like that because they have nightmares. But my children were saying, but why don't they teach them about Jesus? I said, because they're not believers. Use these opportunities to teach your kids about the struggles they will come up against, about spiritual warfare. You have a choice either to shield your children or help them navigate. Now, there are obviously some things you do need to shield them from, and you have to use your wisdom and your judgment, what is appropriate to shield from kids. Sorry, this keeps going on to fade. So it was important for us to teach them about things like the realm of the demonic. We also wanted to nurture them with very small things. So if they had success in an area, we would encourage them further. Luke 16 says, whoever can be trusted with a little can also be trusted with much. So we would tell them something and see how they dealt with it. We'd say, look, this is fairly confidential. You need to make sure you don't tell anyone. And to our knowledge, they never did share that with anyone. So we would then go on more and more to give them, to talk to them about important things that were going on with friends of ours. And they started to feel really honoured and respected. And to our knowledge, they never did share that information. And our daughter, who is normally here, but they're sunning themselves in Mallorca at the moment, she started one time to pray for something that was missing. I don't remember, something very insignificant. And she found it. We didn't ignore that, we nurtured that. And we said, God's honoured that, let's thank him for that. So we did. And the next time we lost something, we said, let's pray for that. And she found it. And this grew and grew and grew until it became a part of her life. And we've even got a friend today who's older than me that semi-jokingly, but partly realistically, occasionally messages Naomi. She calls her Saint Naomi as a joke. Saint Naomi, the keeper of lost things. And she says, can you pray for my diary? I've lost it in my house somewhere. But yeah, whatever your kid is good at in spiritual terms, nurture it.
We didn't make our kids watch Harry Potter, by the way.
we
They're
didn't.
like, no, Dad, I don't want to watch it. You're going to watch it. All their kids around their school were watching Harry Potter or reading Harry Potter, and they wanted to know what it was like. So we said, well, let's go and watch one. So it was actually in Belfast. We watched our first Harry Potter together and then talked about it. But that's the key. You can either build your life around your children, or you build your children around the mission God's called you on. That's a big difference. We've chosen to build our children around the mission God's called us on. I said to Naomi, before she went to Mallorca, I said, what's one thing good we've done and one thing we could have done better? And she said, well, I always felt I was on the mission. I felt I was planting a church. She was only 5. I was planting the church with you. It was us. We were planting the church. I've always felt it was my church. She did go away for 10 years to Birmingham and then came back. And it's just a joy having her back here. I said, what's one thing I could have done better? She said, you were too punitive, which means I punished her. I smacked her. We smacked. Or I did. That was back in the 90s. And you'd get arrested today, probably, if you... I didn't do it horribly. I'd always say, Daddy loves you. You know why I'm smacking you? Yes, because I disobeyed. Don't smack me, Daddy. But I'd smack them. And then after I smacked them, I'd hug them, say, Daddy loves you. Yeah. And one time my son said, I'm going to report you to Childline. None of my friends get smacked. But I tell you what is important, not the smacking thing. It's that your children, if you say no, they know that no means no. You've got to find a way in a state that doesn't allow smacking now to let your children know that no means no, yes means yes. So important. We would always, after church on a Sunday, go home, and the 4 of us would be together, and we'd always say, tell us one thing good. And when I was preaching, one thing good I did, one thing I could have done better if I was preaching. They'd always say, you need to tell more stories about tennis, Dad. So that's where it all started. That's not true. No, they did always say, we love that, but you should tell more stories. We love it when you tell stories. So kids love the stories of your life and the stories that their lives are being woven into.
Now, a number of you have heard me say this before, and I just love talking about this. We never told our children to go to church. We encouraged our children to be the church, because church is who we are as a people together, not just a Sunday morning meeting. And so often we've had parents come to us and say, oh, why is it that I can't drag my children to church? Why is it that they don't want to come? Why is it that they sit there and all they want to do is play on their, in those days it was Game Boy, if any of you are old enough to remember Game Boy, play on their phones, whatever. And we would say to them, are you excited about church? Do you come to church with expectation? Are you on the front foot when it comes to being there on a Sunday morning? Because if you're not, then don't expect your kids to be like that. Kids need to see you demonstrating it. They need to see you living it, all of us. We need to encourage our kids to own church, to take a sense of ownership. So I love it when I see other kids here, like Timothy, who's not here this morning. He's been brought up in this church. He was never told to serve. He just got on and did it. He's now in his 20s, but he comes along and if he sees something missing, he'll do it. He picks up rubbish at the end. He takes empty coffee cups back into there. He just serves. Not because it's a chore, not because he's been asked to, but he's seen his parents and his peers model it. And little Danny, he, I think, probably about the age of 8, sometimes was in the band, wasn't he? Very young. Great. He's starting to have ownership of the church. Let's encourage our kids to serve. But that won't happen unless you do it. Let's encourage our kids to get here in good time to get a front row seat. Well, hey, guess what, parents? That ain't going to happen if you don't get here early. We need to be on the front foot.
By the way, you're allowed to sit on the front row. Look at Elijah's on his own.
He's Billy No Mate.
So please don't think, can I sit on the front? Just come and fill up the front.
The only reason the leaders sit on the front row of church, this is true, is because they're the only seats that are left. It's not because we think, oh, we're more important, we sit on the front row. Do you know what my heart's desire would be? And I mean this, and this is a challenge. I would love it if on a Sunday morning when I turned up at church, I couldn't sit on the front row because you guys were all here and I had to sit at the back. Seriously, that's a challenge. I would love that. Not because the blessing of God is any better at the front. Not at all. The blessing of God is in the room. But because when you've got children, you want them to see what's going on up here. You want them to watch the band, to see people coming up, bringing a word. A child who is sitting, a small child, a toddler who is sitting at the back behind another grown-up can only see that grown-up's back. Seriously, it makes a difference. So we really would encourage you to get here early, get here, serve, and be on the front foot. Oh, sorry, is that me? Sorry, we've got one on here and one on there. Another thing that we feel is important, and this is biblical, is to model apologizing. It's very easy for us to discipline and tell our kids off. It's really key that you make them aware of when you've made mistakes. Because we do make mistakes as parents, grandparents, even as Sunday school teachers or as part of the village community. We all make mistakes. Children need to hear us as adults saying, I'm sorry, I messed up, I made a mistake, can you forgive me? That's a really big one, and that we've come across. A lot of people don't do it. I'm going to give you an example from this that will either make you squirm or you will laugh hilariously. Please laugh hilariously. When Naomi was about 8 years old, he went off on a church missions trip to Bogota in Colombia. So I was at home with the two children. And I got into a big argument with Naomi. I can't remember what it was about, and that's irrelevant. But she was arguing back with me. I was arguing with her. Voices were raised. It got worse and worse and worse. And she was doing things like raising her eyebrows and sighing and, ooh, you know, all this attitude. So the argument actually wasn't changed from being about whatever the original thing was to being about the attitude, right? So we're having this big heated discussion about attitude. And she was like, oh, so I lost it. And I'm ashamed to say, I yelled at her and I pushed her back onto the bed. And she fell backwards onto the bed and started crying. I realized at that point that I'd overstepped the line. And I shouldn't have done that. So I said, look, what we're going to do is... we do need to talk about what's gone on here, but we both need some space. We'll go away in a few minutes. I'll come back and we're going to talk about this. And we'll both calm down. Went out, came back a few minutes later, and she's sitting there on her bed, sobbing. So I said, look, the very first thing before we talk about this argument is I want to hold my hands up and say, I'm sorry. I got angry. I did not treat you right, and I was disrespectful, and I want to say, I'm really sorry. Can you forgive me? To which she replied, yes, Mummy, I forgive you. Anyway, I think I know why you might be really angry with me today. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, Daddy says that every month you get an egg in your tummy that makes you really grumpy. Yes. All I can say is a good thing he was over the other side of the world at that point.
Yes, I'm glad I was there. Un café con leche, por favor. So, what about if your children aren't going on with Jesus? You see, it says in the Bible, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. And I've heard many Christians basically say, that's a promise from God, and you should feel terrible if your children aren't going on with God. It's not a promise from God. It's a proverb. It is wisdom. Whatever you want to put in your children, put it into them young. If it's sport, get them into sport. If it's Jesus, get them into Jesus. Why not do both? Get them into education. 3. That's probably multitasking for you guys. So it's important to start them off young, but there's no guarantee. There are in the New Testament whole households that get saved, and get baptized because they all believed. But that doesn't mean everyone believes. Isaac had twins, Jacob and Esau. They both had the blessings of God offered to them. One went on with God, and one didn't. I'm sure we won't see Esau if we make it to heaven. Might be wrong. I'll apologize if I am. Although I don't think there's any apologies in heaven. So Cain and Abel, Adam's two first boys. Cain's sacrifice or his offering was not accepted. Abel's was. Cain was jealous of his brother and killed him. And it never says Cain repented and came back to God. I don't think Cain's going to be there. The people of God do not have an automatic promise that your children will believe. And your children, they may be grown up and not going on with God. What do? You keep praying. You keep asking God. You keep loving them. They're your number one disciples. You try to be with them at the milestones of their life. Even if you disagree the way their life's going, be there for them. They'll know you disagree. You don't have to tell them every time, you know I'm a Christian, I disagree. I don't think that's very helpful. I think you just tell them, I love you so much. When my children were leaving home, they were both about 18, or our children, sorry. We had them I did most of the work to get them. Yeah, that sounded wrong, didn't it? Edit that from the tape, thank you. When they were about 18 and leaving home, I said to them, look, I'm always going to love you. Because you actually, when you take them with you to church, that is one thing, and it's hard for them not to carry on. But as they go off and they live in another city, it's quite easy for them to think, actually, I won't go to church today. I had a late night Saturday. And it's a turning point for some kids who've grown up in Christian homes. So I said to my children, I love Jesus and I love you. I know I'm going to be with Jesus forever, and I would hate it if you weren't there as well. But whatever you do with your life, I'm going to try and be there for you. I'm going to try to love you in anything you do. I won't always agree, but I will love you. I think it's very important to keep telling your kids you're for them. But there's no promise that your children will believe. So keep praying. Keep apologizing if you need to. Keep doing whatever you think you can. I don't think you should keep talking to them about Jesus, by the way, if they've said, actually, for now. Because the Bible makes it very clear, you look for a door to open for the gospel. And so keep praying for a door to open for the gospel. And if a door opens, which usually they'll say, how's church going or something, they're kind of giving you a bit of permission to talk about your Christian life. But don't overdo it, because if they start looking at their watch, you know probably you've said enough. But look for opportunities to share again. But I think it's important to keep telling them what's happening in your life as a Christian. This is what God's done this week. It's amazing, yeah. Or this is how hard it's been for us this week. We really can't understand what God's doing. Share your positive, share your negative. And I love this verse. If you're in Christ, there's no condemnation. We've got to keep rolling off shame because we have an enemy who keeps attacking us, keeps wanting us to feel like we're failures. That's not true. If you're in Christ, you reign in life. You can't lose. He's got you. If God is for you, who can be against you? But it does take a village to raise children. So it's great we've got children here. Get to know the parents first, but then get to know the children as well. Be like Dave Southern. Make it fun to be around for little kids. I want the little children loving coming.
Can I add something there? Is that
Ooh, I don't think so. I was really landing there, baby. Let's pray about it.
I said to, as some of you know, we now have grandchildren that come here. And I said a few weeks ago to our granddaughter, who's just turned 4, what do you like? What do you really like about church? What do you enjoy doing? And I was waiting for some big spiritual revelation, like, I love worshipping the Lord or learning about Jesus. And she said, I love playing with Sonia. But do you know, that's important. People taking interest in other people's children is absolutely key. The people that our children, now they're grown up, still love and talk about with respect and with joy are those people that took an interest in them when they were little. The children that are out there now in our youth, kids, tots work, whatever, many of them are going to be the leaders